his experience at McDonald's from the biography Heart of Tibet. But first, I want to share a little bit about like road trips in America. If you know about like highways, you can only get certain fast foods, right? And there are also gas stations like this one's called Love's. It's especially for truck drivers. So I recently learned about this, you know how? Because the buses I took to and from Atlanta, they keep stopping by Love's. And during my way back, I was like, oh, it's such a cute name, it's such a cute logo, and I should support them. So then, in addition to my essentials, oh, we have a live audience. I also got this lighter, and they had to check for my ID, and my ID is not like that easily attainable. It's like a passport, so I had to like take it out from the pocketbook. And then I asked like the Uber driver, Scott, I'm like, why do they need to check ID for a lighter? They can just stop the sales of lighters at gas stations if they don't want people, randos, buying lighters. And then Scott said, oh, it's because of weird regulations. So he shared the story. I think he was like a soldier. He shared the story about how when he was 18, they allowed drinking on camp base when you are serving, but once you leave, the age limit is still at 21. So these are just the weird Americanisms that I'm learning about. And he was like, oh, yeah, this is like a gas station for truck drivers. So I was like, oh, and then, okay, by the time I reached the station of Augusta, there was a pregnant white lady, okay? And she was like so upset waiting for her ride, who is probably the baby or like the fetus's father. And she was like crying on the phone. And then she was also smoking. In the end, she returned a lighter to like a fellow person waiting at the station. And I was like, I'm so fortunate that I have a lighter, you know, like I got the lighter last minute. I wasn't planning to get it. And these are just some of the like the intuitive things that the Buddha Dharma or Dharma in general, like Hindu Dharma, Christian Dharma, they can help you with. Like you don't know when you need certain things, but then it's just like an aha moment, and then you get it, and then that other person who isn't following like her truest path, she's gonna be crying on the phone at a bus station borrowing lighters from strangers. And then I was like, oh, I felt so sorry for her, but on the other hand, like it's a good thing that she got a lighter. She got a lighter even though like she couldn't afford one. So that's like the beauty of like McDonald's as well. No, this is not the McDonald's side. This is the McDonald's side. McDonald's. That's like the dream, right? Like it's like if even if you can't cook, even if you're like overweight, you can still get McDonald's. Like McDonald's is never gonna say no to you. And that's what Chetsang Rinpoche experienced when he came to America. It was like really liberating, I feel like, for him when he was like, oh, I don't have to report to a party official who's like gonna like report further upwards. And I also don't have to report to like a different system of bureaucracy, even if that might be like a truer one, it's still a system of control. So he managed to kind of figure himself out. He had that space, he had that safe space. And part of it was like working for McDonald's. Because I was working in a restaurant and I can't stand the smell of, you know, certain things anymore. But I used to eat McDonald's too, so it's really cool. Let's see which page. His parents soon began pressuring Chetsang Rinpoche, His Holiness, to improve his English. His father and his brother and sisters spoke excellent English, and his mother also had a good command of the language. For a while, Rinpoche attended an intensive course at the International Language School at the University of Texas in Houston. I've never been to Houston. At first, he took the bus to school very early in the morning, but when his father bought a new car, Rinpoche drove his parents' old Toyota to class. He only attended the school for 5 months, though, because the course was designed for much more advanced students who could already read and write fairly well. He wasn't even familiar with the Roman alphabet, like M. M is for McDonald's. The Roman alphabet. So I wrote the Batuka Bhairava mantra on here, and it's not in Roman, okay? It takes a while to get used to that idea that you can have mantras in Roman alphabets, like once you are immersed in like certain non-Roman alphabet cultures, and then you're like, you can just write it in Roman alphabet, like Latin Roman alphabets. Needed a more basic introduction to English. Se alpha! Rinpoche's knowledge of the Chinese and Tibetan writing systems were of no help, and despite his quick intelligence and extraordinary memorization skills, the course material was not very useful to him. LOVE. When he was taking morning English classes, he had nothing to do in the afternoons, and he disliked inactivity. He first tried to get a job as a kitchen help at a Chinese restaurant near his parents' apartment, but when the owners were reluctant to hire him, his brother helped him apply at a McDonald's restaurant in the neighborhood. Despite his poor English, the manager hired him on the spot, and the job was better than the Chinese restaurant, where he would only have spoken Chinese. Ni hao, ni hao ma. By the way, our chef at the Indian restaurant could speak a little bit of Chinese. He was like, ni hao. I don't even remember when was the last time an Indian person knew how to say ni hao, but like that was really special. Okay, from then on, he worked at the McDonald's every afternoon. The restaurant was popular and he had to work briskly and without interruption. During his first week, he had considerable difficulty keeping all of the orders straight, working the machines, and finishing all the hamburgers quickly enough. But soon he had mastered the routine and could perform all of the tasks smoothly. His work at the restaurant gave him great pleasure. He marveled at the contrast between his improvised hearth in Tonga, Tibet, and the fast food restaurant's kitchen. All the appliances in the kitchen were machines, and everything was subject to continual innovation, presenting him with a drastic example of the fundamental Buddhist principle of impermanence and change in all things. Each week, something was altered or improved, the chairs were replaced, or the decoration was modified. The level of activity and efficiency was incredible and ceaseless. Rinpoche had never seen anything like it, either in Tibet or in India. He began to think that people in the West were not just materially advanced, but more intellectually advanced as well. Did y'all invent the lighter? Did y'all invent the foundation? I was just thinking to this to myself. He was most impressed by the specialization of labor, which was completely different from the way things worked in Tibet. He began to think about the importance of education, and he noticed that specialized knowledge in diverse areas was what made it possible for the West to take the lead in many fields. こんにちは。私はエイドリンです。今日はチェツァン・リンポチェ Biography 始めまして。I'm speaking broken Japanese, it's okay. But in spite of the deep impression these advanced techniques made, he was certain that they had produced a perilous disequilibrium by focusing exclusively on the technical material aspects of life. Okay, some Orientalism about Tibetans being spiritually advanced. We're gonna skip that because I feel kind of uncomfortable talking about that right now. Free Tibet. The Taro family changed lodgings frequently in the greater Houston area, and when they were about to move yet again, the McDonald's manager tried to keep Rinpoche by offering him a promotion. He would gladly have stayed because he enjoyed the work there, but he had to relocate to Arlington with his parents. CIA, Norbu Chen had moved to Arlington, the white spiritual guy. And Chetsang Rinpoche's father wished to follow in order to keep working for him. Furthermore, Norbu Chen had fallen seriously ill, and Rinpoche's father was determined to take care of him. Oh no! White guy sick. Okay, Chetsang Rinpoche had had his driver's license for 2 months when they moved to Arlington. His parents drove off first, and Rinpoche followed in his father's old car. Just before Dallas, the highway divided behind a wall of huge traffic signs. At the last moment, Rinpoche's father noticed that he had to turn off, but there was too much traffic for Rinpoche to make the exit, and he drove on straight toward Dallas. Yangchen Dolkar and Dondu Namgyal was distraught. It seemed that it would be impossible to find their son or for him to find them again in the confusion of unfamiliar roads and people, like people checking me for ID for a lighter. Are we in Xinjiang? Is this Xinjiang? Like Communist Party rule? Anyways, although it seemed hopeless, Rinpoche's father drove back to the place where they had lost sight of him and searched vainly for the Toyota for a long time. Our first car was also a Toyota, you know, immigrants, Asians, woo, shout out. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he saw Rinpoche's car turning into a gas station. Rinpoche got out of the car with an impish smile, as if it were just another adventure, borrowing lighters from strangers at bus stations. I really feel for the pain of all like women suffering in these conditions. It's like a universal phenomena, but in America it's worse because there's no social system to like, other than like the foster system once like the baby's 3. Anyways, it's terrible. He had driven to Dallas and then back in the direction of Fort Worth to turn off at the exit for Arlington. So they met in the midst of that massively congested area in a tangle of highways, like two needles meeting in a haystack. Oh, and then we have a picture of him in front of the White House in Washington, D.C. Shout out Joe Biden, President Joe Biden. He still has a few months. Later, Rinpoche simply got into his old Toyota and explored the United States on his own. Although his parents had lived in America for 6 years by then, they still had difficulty finding their way, hesitated to drive to unfamiliar areas, and felt like uncertain strangers. Especially if you grew up in Tibet, it's like you don't leave. Like, why would you leave? This is like heaven, right? And then, like, the perfect place to do tantra because there's a lot of privacy. Like an Indian yogi was telling like the people how Vajra Yogini is so important to the tantric system is because she's the gate to the Vajra field. Like you can just construct this field even if you don't have the privacy of Tibet anymore. And that's what I also learned at Garchen Buddhist Institute. It's like I didn't know how to articulate it, but I could also feel like we were constructing a Vajra field, which was pretty amazing. And yeah, shout out to everyone who has the patience to do that like on a daily basis. I don't, but the Sangha does, so trust the Sangha. Rinpoche, however, simply got into his car and took off on solitary tours without any particular destination for days, sometimes weeks at a time, taking in a multitude of details in that new world. After the move to Arlington, Rinpoche went to the library at a nearby college every morning for 6 months to study on his own to improve his English. In the audiovisual section, he could watch videos and slides with accompanying narratives. Not surprisingly, he especially enjoyed the programs about animals and their behaviors. Kalakuta. Slides about the Yeti amused him because he was convinced that in reality the Yeti was a very large bear. Shout out the bear. Someone from Garchen Buddhist Institute also recommended me to watch the show. I haven't watched it yet. It's called The Bear. Also about restaurants and stuff. Occasionally, the colossal bears appeared in Tibet, even larger than the yaks. Rinpoche himself had once seen the skin of one of these monstrous creatures in a house in Tibet. It lay spread over a huge double bed and still covered part of the floor. The fur of such bear was very short and shiny with a long white stripe. Only a few people in remote settlements had ever seen one of these huge animals, and thus the myth of the Yeti had arisen. In Arlington, Rinpoche also worked in a restaurant, again, this time in a steak and ale house, first as a dishwasher and then as a kitchen helper, mostly frying potatoes and looking after the salad bar. We used to have, okay, this Indian restaurant used to have like a bar type situation for, you know, eat all, but COVID ended that. He had now lived almost 2 years in the United States, and although he had seldom thought about it, he had never doubted that he would eventually return and take his place on the throne of the Drikung lineage. He had ignored the Drikung Lama's beseeching letters that came during the first months after his arrival in the United States, but now he began to speak with his father about returning to India. Made in India. Pyara Sonia. Okay, telling him that there had never been any other option. Rinpoche had brought 2 sets of monks' robes to the United States. One from the Dalai Lama, long live His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and the other from Chonyi Dorje, the Rani of Bhutan. Shout out Bhutan. He had given them he had given them to his mother and requested that she take good care of them as he would need them. I first had Bhutanese food in Dharamshala, and I don't really like cheese that much, but I ate it for the sake of, cultural appreciation. It's called like emadachi. Yeah. Yeah, emadachi. And there were like people living in the restaurant too. It's like, I want to live in a restaurant. If I work here, I should be able to live here. Anyways, in America, it doesn't work that well. At the end of 1977, Chetsang Rinpoche decided to move in with his sister Namla in New Jersey, packed his things in his car, and drove off. Lobsang Samten had grown up with the Rinpoches, and 3 of his brothers were high incarnate lamas. Check this out. Born in New Jersey. The Dalai Lama, Taktse Rinpoche, and Nyari Rinpoche. When Rinpoche arrived unannounced at their doorstep, Lobsang said to his wife, "This is certainly a Rinpoche. He is a stranger in the United States, knowing hardly any English, and drives all the way from Texas to us on his own. And on top of everything, he arrived without letting us know beforehand." Sounds like me, except I'm not a Rinpoche. I had that conversation with the person who recommended me to watch The Bear. He was like, if you just work hard, things will show up eventually. And I'm like, that's your attitude because you're a commoner and I'm a commoner, we have to work hard. Otherwise, people are just born with it, like the incarnate lamas. A short time before moving to New Jersey, Rinpoche had received a package from Sondu Senge. Shout out Senge, a learned monk from the Drikung Monastery in Sobhema in India. It contained a copy of a very rare Tibetan text on the history of the throne holders of the Drikung order, written by the 4th Chetsang Rinpoche Peme Gyaltsen, 1770 to 1826. He had composed this history of the lineage and the life stories of the lineage holders, Dengrab, in the early 19th century and entitled it The Golden Garland of the Throne Lineage, Denrab Chochung Sertreng. His sources were chronicles and works by earlier Drikung lineage holders, as well as the Dharma history of Tawo Tsuglak Trengwa, 1504 to 1566. It was the case with all historical writing in Tibet. Pema Gyaltsen had difficulty identifying precise dates if only a year's zodiac was specified without indicating the corresponding element and 60-year cycle, Rabjung. So there are 12 zodiacs. 5 of the 12 make a 60 Rabjung cycle. So then because there are 5 elements, fire being one of them, Rinpoche was fascinated by this document and decided to turn his attention to the study of the history of Tibet, of Drikung, and of his own previous incarnations as written down by Pema Gyaltsen. Although Pema Gyaltsen had gone to great pains to verify the dates of particular events by comparing them with Tibetan annals, Rinpoche took on the even more daunting task of asserting the exact chronology in terms of Western calendar days. Shout out Roman characters and numerals. The project's difficulty lay in the extraordinarily complex astronomical calculations used to construct the Tibetan calendar for each year, one in which days or even entire months could either be skipped or repeated. We are in Shravan. In terms of Hindu calendar time, we are in Shravan right now. And different people in the mountains have different shamans. It's like, y'all are neighbors and y'all can't agree on the calendar. Okay. Every day, Rinpoche took the bus to New York City to comb through literature on this topic in the New York Public Library, and he was surprised to discover how many Tibetan works on the most varied subjects were available in the library. In the reading room, he met Shakapa, his sister Norzen's father-in-law, and the author of the well-known historical work Tibet, A Political History, published in 1976. I wonder if this is the one I read in Yellow Yak. There's like a cafe in McLeodganj. They have also books, and it's pretty cool. Yeah, I think they might have had this copy. This is like one of the older ones. If y'all can see it. It's like pretty thick. Yeah, once I was in a Hindu temple and the dude was like, "Have you read the Mahabharata?" I'm like, "It's too thick, bro. It's too thick." Shakapa was now working on a new book, and they found themselves caught up in the lively discussions about the history and politics of their homeland. Remade. Rinpoche closed in on his difficult task methodically until, after exhaustive research, he succeeded in unequivocally fixing a date from Jigten Sunggen's time. This is the founder of the Drikung lineage. Someone was like, he's a cool guy, when they were like, oh, we love Drikung. You know, they're not Tibetan, they're not Asian, but they love Jigten Sunggen. He had drawn up a concordance of the Tibetan Rabjung cycles with the Gregorian calendar, starting in 1975 and working backwards in time until he found a correspondence with a date he had ascertained in Jigten Sunggen's era. He checked some dates with those in other historical works, and when he found that they corresponded with his system, he began to delve into the contents of Pema Jeltsen's book. This work was a source of a profound understanding for Chetsang Rinpoche, and he became familiar with the origins, significance, and history of the lineage he was to lead. At the same time, his study of the text inspired a broad perspective on the Tibetan past, the spiritual roots of the Drikung Kagyu Pa, and his own mind stream, since his own incarnation lineage was intertwined with the unfolding history of the order. And on a larger scale, the country. He was a manifestation of this history. He was the result of these historical events. As I am the result of historical events. He gained insight into the development of the Drikung lineage within the unfolding of epochs, into his spiritual genealogy, and into a history filled with tales of heroism and villainy. I had to tell my family members, like, you know, Tibetans are also robbers. They're not noble savages, okay? Purity, corruption, and intrigue, weakness and power, war and peace. This was a history of an epic struggle to manifest goodness in the world, to bring about the spiritual perfection that would ultimately defeat all suffering and affliction. Shout out Red Shambhala. I also read part of that book by the Russian author Andrei something. This was the history of which he himself was an integral part. Spiritual genealogy, the throne holders of Drikung. The first dissemination of Buddhism in Tibet. This is chapter 3. The first dissemination of Buddhism in Tibet, the Nadar, took place during the 7th and 8th century and was followed by an epoch of decline. The Buddhist Renaissance was initiated by Rinchen Sampo, 958 to 1055, who is regarded as the first great translator of Chidar, the second diffusion or later spreading of the Dharma. And his activity was crucial to the revival of cultural exchange between Tibet and India. The renowned Bengali monk Atisha, Namaskar, Atisha went to the kingdom of Guge in western Tibet, where he reformed Tibetan Buddhism, translated numerous texts into Tibetan, and introduced the Tantra, most recently disseminated in India, the Kala Chakra, which became the basis for the new calendar system in Tibet. The Kadampa order arose on the basis of Atisha's reforms, and in the 11th and 12th century, many famous monasteries emerged in the wake of this Buddhist renaissance, among them Drikung Til in 1179. Okay, we're going to end here. I just want to shout out to the people who beat up the ISI agent in Canada. It's like, the ops. You know, the ops are usually somebody else, but in the case of South Asia, they're always them. You know, they're always them. And the people who recently, you know, asserted themselves in the homeland of Atisha knows that very well, and that's why they won. So congratulations to everybody from the homeland of Atisha, and take care. See you next time. Hope you guys enjoyed Chetsang Rinpoche's saga in North America and his way into his throne.